Well, in just a couple of weeks, I'm going to be packing my bags and heading off to Africa on a mission trip. So that means I'm here at the local store, not to buy anything for myself, but I'm picking up some deodorant and some pepperoni for my friends that I'm going to be seeing because where they're living, these things aren't available. One of the most important aspects of a short-term mission trip is the blessing that you can be to the missionaries that you go to see. How you can help them, support them, give them a respite, give them a treat from home. Never know what somebody's going to ask me to bring. One time we had some friends look all over 7 different states trying to find some blonde hair coloring. They were pretty surprised when they got to our house and realized it was to give to a fella. Anyway, that's just one of the things you need to think about as you get ready for a volunteer mission trip. Hopefully in today's video you're going to learn some other things to keep in mind that will help you to be more effective on the field, less of a pain and more of a blessing to the missionaries who are preparing for you, and a joy to the nationals you encounter. So get out your notebook and your pencil and get ready to take some notes. Welcome to our class on mission strategies. Today we're going to be looking at volunteers in missions as we continue to consider contemporary strategies that are being used around the world on the mission field. I hope you've had a chance to watch the brief video about mission strategies in Aruba. Hopefully you weren't too motivated. I just thought that would be a good way to get you into the mood to talk about what volunteers can and shouldn't do in missions. Prior to 1975, believe it or not, there was not a lot of effort to use volunteers on the mission field. Of course, at that time, travel was much more restricted. It was difficult and expensive, and the church had been taught to let missionaries do all of the work. And many missionaries preferred it that way. Some still do. We'll talk about that in a minute. But within the Southern Baptist Convention, in particular, there was a movement called Bold Mission Thrust, a plan to complete world evangelization before the turn of the millennium. One step to accomplishing that goal was to see 10,000 volunteers to serve overseas every year. 15 years later, that goal had been met, so that a second plan was put into place, 5,000 retirees and students serving on the field. 25 years later, in 2015, the IMB began to talk about a brand new concept in missions, an innovative new strategy called Limitless. It seems like everything old is new again. But in today's session, we're going to be considering volunteers, and I want us to look at the issue from the sender's perspective as well as the receiver's perspective. Then I want us to look at how partnerships between the church and the field can be most effective. So let's start by talking about some things that need to be thought of on the part of the sender. Before a church decides to send a team, what are the factors that they need to consider? First, I think they need to consider some geographic issues. Voluntourism, like demonstrated in the video, can be a detriment to the work on the mission field. Long-term folks on the field have to stop their work to become tour guides for people who just want to see how many stamps they can get in their passport. Rather than picking an exotic location and going somewhere else every year, I would encourage a church looking to get involved in missions to pick a place that needs the skills that that church has, and then to build a long-term partnership. At first, the church will need more help from the folks on the ground, but pretty soon a church can take care of themselves. I've often said that the first time a local church goes to visit a missionary on the field and partner in a project, for every hour of benefit the missionary gets, he has to put in 10 hours of work. But on the second trip, for 5 hours of benefit, he puts in 5 hours of work. And by the third time, he's only putting in an hour of work and getting 10 hours of benefit. So it definitely pays off in the long run as a church gets more and more adjusted to working in a particular spot. But if every year the church just goes to a new place, there's never any momentum built, and it's always more of a drain on the mission field than a benefit. So pick a specific place. After a while, some churches that continue going back to the same place even rent apartments, make multiple trips in a year, send someone from their home church for a year or two to coordinate all of the efforts and really help that church develop a focus. Another factor to consider when you're picking a location: what do your people love? What services can you provide that are actually needed there on the field? Can you find someone who can show you how what you're doing helps them meet their long-term goals, or what else that your church could do that would be helpful and is within your ability? Also consider if there is another church or other churches in your area that are maybe small and don't have the capacity to have an international program on their own that might want to partner with you, working together to meet a particular need on the field. Also, you're going to want to consider financial issues. How much will this trip cost? How will the money be raised? Will the church pay for everything, or will there be fundraising projects? Whether it's projects or maybe some activities, or simply asking for sponsorship from members in the church. Regardless, be sure that all the money is handled in a transparent fashion so there can be no questions about the integrity of the process. When putting together the budget, be sure to overestimate the expenses because the trip will surely cost more than you are anticipating. Make sure people know that they're going to need passports, visas, travel fees, extra baggage fees to cover supplies that are going to be brought with you, money for meals en route, supplies for all the projects, for souvenirs, etc. Many people are living on a very tight budget, and if we say it's going to cost them $1,000 to go on a trip with our church, and then at the last minute say, oh, I forgot there's another $50 fee you need for a visa, that could just put some people over the edge. And so make sure that you're rounding up, overestimating how much it's going to cost. Nobody's going to be disappointed when they get there and you say, oh, look, you have $100 left over. So consider that as you're putting together the budget. Make sure you give some thought to orientation. How will participants be prepared for the trip? How often do you plan to meet? When will you meet? Where will you meet? How soon will a packing list be given so they'll know what things they need to start gathering for the trip? What cultural training will be needed beforehand? Has a near culture community moved into your area so that you can go to a restaurant or meet some people, begin to ask some questions, and even begin developing a ministry presence at home with those same people that you're going to be working with cross-culturally? If possible, try to learn a few phrases, at least hello, goodbye, and thank you in the target language. Make sure everyone is aware of taboos. If you're going to be in Southeast Asia, you're going to want to be very careful about not showing your feet to anyone. If you're working in an Islamic context, make sure that males and females know that they should not be touching each other in public, even if they're married. Eating beef is a terrible thing to do in a Hindu culture, so just be prepared for that and don't even talk about it or joke about it. That can be very offensive. But specific issues like that exist wherever you're going, so find out what are the cultural things you need to know so that you can avoid disasters before they even start. Remember, the missionaries on the ground are going to be there long after you and your team have gone home, so be sure to listen to their advice. Obviously, a lot of this orientation will need to take place before you leave, but don't forget to plan time for early awareness training after you get there, for someone who's there on the ground to give you some more insights, things that you need to keep in mind while you're in country. Have regular debriefs set up every night if possible, just to kind of talk about the experiences of the day and any issues that may have developed, any questions that have formed. And then plan a follow-up meeting when you get back home to record lessons learned and discuss next steps to continue the partnership. Medical issues need to be given thought. Do you need vaccinations before you go? What are the age and health concerns for your group? Will the trip you're planning require strenuous physical activity? Is there a lot of walking to be done? Will you be facing extreme temperatures? Is there medical care easily available in case of emergency? If not, what will you do? Are you bringing a medical person to meet that need? Do you have traveler's insurance in case of an evacuation? Be sure that all of these practical issues have been discussed and decided with your hosts before you hit the ground. Last, consider the spiritual issues. Many times churches, dare I say especially youth pastors, think a mission trip is a great time to help a person to decide to follow Jesus. But remember, you are bringing folks into spiritual warfare, probably into an area filled with spiritual darkness, or they wouldn't need a mission trip where they are. So unless you've discussed this with the folks on the field and you have a special understanding, only recruit believers who are in a good relationship with the Lord to come along on this trip. This is a missions activity, not a holiday. Prepare a devotional guide that participants can work through each day on the field to be sure they're remaining grounded in the Word and considering what the Father is saying to them throughout this journey. You also might want to make that available to prayer supporters who I'm sure you will have recruited so that they can be interceding alongside of you each day, feeling more informed and more a part of the work that the church is doing as a whole. So those are things to consider as you're preparing to send a team, but what should you be thinking about as you're preparing to receive a team and putting yourself in the position of being a missionary on the field? What are the issues you're going to want to consider? Of course, these issues on the ground are a mirror image of the ones that are faced by the sending church. But let's just look at what it's like on the other side of the looking glass. What are the dangers inherent to having a volunteer group come over? Some missionaries only see the dangers of short-term teams, and there are many. Volunteer teams can eat up your time and your precious groceries from the United States that you've been hoarding. They can offend your national partners or ruin them by throwing around cash. They can blow your security cover and harm your witness in the community. Why would you even want to have a volunteer team? Well, there are incredible benefits. First, the Great Commission is for everyone, not just professionals. And so a way that the missionary on the field can give back to the global church is to create opportunities for people to be faithful to God's call and be a part of fulfilling the Great Commission. Helping churches see how they can partner in a way that is strategic can also prevent those same churches from partnering in ways that are not. They're going to come anyway, so why not give them a strategic focus and help them be a part of what you are doing? When people see what is happening on the field, they're going to grow in Christ. They'll grow in their financial support of missions, their prayer support for missionaries, and quite possibly in their openness to serving alongside you longer term. So it really is to the benefit of the missionary to develop long-term partnerships and train stateside partners to come over as volunteers. Of course, to do that, there are going to be some training needs. There is in the class shell there a outline just to give you an example of some of the things that would be covered in a volunteer training before people came to the field. Key aspects that you would want to cover is how does what they are doing contribute to the big picture of the team overall? Providing practical information in terms of dress, food, shots, airlines to avoid or to use, schedules to be implemented while they're on the ground. Cultural issues, how to share the gospel in that context, greetings, appropriate words that they might want to know. Considering security issues, both personal security, how to remain safe, what to eat or not to eat, what kind of vehicle to get in, how to display or not display their valuables, but also ministry security issues. What can they say? What kind of vocabulary should they use? What kind of vocabulary do they need to avoid? So think through what you want to cover in your training. One thing that you're going to want to think about as you're training is translation and some translator tips. Finding good translators is very important when you're bringing a team in from overseas. It can be a great way to train your national partners. We would always want to get local team members to partner up in a prayer walking experience with people coming from the United States. It would just give them an opportunity to learn how to do the ministry alongside someone who's already been trained. But it's also just a way to help them mature in their understanding of the gospel. As many times as they go out with teams that are sharing the gospel, they're learning to share the gospel more. It's just a great discipleship opportunity for your translators. You're going to want to work with the people who are going to be using translators as well. Particularly if they're going to come and do some preaching, you want to help them to know that alliteration doesn't translate because you're using different language. That plays on words aren't funny because you're using a different language. I'll never forget the first time I heard a pastor from America preaching in India. He told the joke about why Theophilus' parents gave him that name. They said that the doctor looked at him when he was born and said, "That's the awfulest looking baby I've ever seen in my life." Now, even in English, that's not a very funny joke. But imagine what that play on words sounds like in Telugu, where the word Theophilus doesn't mean the worst looking. So just avoid all of that. Avoid cultural references that won't make sense. Instead, exchange them for cultural references that will. If you're going to be speaking in India about a river, don't talk about the mighty Mississippi. Talk about the Ganges. But find ways to touch the culture that you're serving. And prepare them to use very short, simple sentences with very simple language, no slang. So let's put all that together and talk about why we would want to do this, go through all this effort and build these partnerships with volunteer groups from the States, or they could be from Korea or Mexico or Philippines or anywhere in the world that is sending out missionaries. Why would we want to build these partnership relationships? Often we talk about the three-legged stool. Paul wrote to the church in Philippi about their partnership and says, "I thank my God in all my remembrance of you, always in every prayer of mine for you, making my prayer with joy because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now." From the very beginning of that church that was planted in Philippi, Paul saw them as a partner. And we talk about this partnership and how effective it can be on the field in terms of a three-legged stool. Each leg of this stool is essential or the chair will collapse. It won't be able to hold the weight of the person sitting on it. The first leg is the sending church, the church in your home country that wants to send a team, that wants to get involved, that wants to partner. They bring something unique to the whole project. They own the Great Commission because that was given to every church. Again, not just the missionaries. The sending church is providing prayer. They're providing financial resources. In some ways, they're what we call the monkey for the organ grinder. They're drawing everybody's attention, and they pull people out who might not necessarily be drawn to a national evangelist, but they want to come and see this foreigner, and then they can step out of the way and hand the work over to the insider to continue to move that. Also, a lot of times in the sending church, they have more of an educational background, a better understanding of God's Word. There are things that they can contribute to a ministry overseas. But they're just one leg. On the other side, you have the national partner. The national partner is going to provide long-term stability, a consistent presence, an insider's understanding of the culture. The national partner isn't going to lose their visa and get kicked out of the country, causing the work to collapse. They're going to be there for the long haul, and they can multiply the manpower on the ground to do the work. But that's only two of the three legs. You also need the third leg, which is the missionary. The missionary stands between the two worlds of the home culture and the national culture and provides accountability. They can interpret literally the language, but also the culture issues that are going to come up between the stateside partner and the national church. There's going to be misunderstandings. The missionary has a foot in both worlds and is able to serve as a go-between to provide guidance for both sides. And so we want to put this three-legged stool together so that we can have the most effective missionary partnerships possible. A huge issue that comes up in that process is going to be related to funding. How can funding help, and how does funding hurt? I want to start answering that question by just looking at this schematic of a healthy church planting movement and effective church planting movement. I know that at first glance, this picture doesn't mean a lot to you, so let me just kind of explain it to you as a background for where money's going to help. The triangle on the top with VC is the vision caster. That could be a national who's been at work for a long time and has been called of God to serve as an area director, or it could be the missionary themselves, but the person who is casting the vision for the need to reach an entire people group with the gospel. This would be like John Knox. Give me Scotland or I die. Someone who looks at the entire big picture of the people group and says, we need to reach these people with the gospel. Underneath that, you'll have a layer of master trainers, people who know how to get the work done. They've been trained in training others in ways that can multiply the work out. Each master trainer, I didn't draw it out because of the size of the slide, but each master trainer would be working with a number of church planting strategists who are working in particular districts, and each of them are training leaders. You see the dots there represent multiple leaders serving in multiple house churches that are being started. And then every member of each of those house churches is out looking for more houses of peace. I was in a training a couple of years ago. We talked to people from Cuba, from India, from China, from Algeria, from Singapore, from all over the world who were seeing rapidly reproducing healthy churches being developed and spread throughout an entire people group. All of them had different vocabulary, but all of them had this same structure where you have a strategy coordinator or a vision caster or a missionary who sees the big picture. They're working with leadership development people, these master trainers who are raising up church planting strategists who are training church planters to start house churches in which every member is going out to start more groups by finding houses of peace. So with that in mind, where do you put money that's beneficial? What happens sometimes is volunteer groups come over and they meet some of these people working in these house churches and say, well, what a nice guy. He's out sharing the gospel. I want to buy him a bicycle. He's a nice guy. He's out sharing the gospel. I want to give him just a little bit of money. I'll just give him $100, which in that culture could be an entire year's salary. That creates division. It creates jealousy. It creates problems. And so we had a rule of where money would go and where money would not go. We would not give money to anybody in a local church. God's design is for the local church to support their pastor and for the individual members of the church to do the spiritual disciplines for free. If you pay a Christian to share the gospel, two things happen. One is other people are discouraged from sharing the gospel because they're not getting paid. And the second one is the person who is getting paid actively discourages other people from sharing the gospel because that's a threat to their livelihood. Whatever we pay people to do stops happening without money. So we want to be careful not to bring money into any issue of spiritual discipline. All of us are supposed to pray. We don't pay people to pray. All of us are to share the gospel. We don't pay people to share the gospel. All of us are to make disciples. We don't pay people to make disciples. So no money goes below that line. Now, master trainers and church planning strategists, they're generally supported from within the network. Maybe they've started a group of churches that are supporting them, much as a pastor would be supported. But money can be used wisely to give them Bibles to distribute, or to pay for transportation, help them get a bus ticket to go to the next village to do a training, or to provide the training, to rent a hall where a training could take place, or whatever needs to happen in that sense. But we don't pay their salary. We don't give them a stipend. We just help with material things that are necessary for the work. It is the case that there will be nationals who are called of God as missionaries, and they would need a salary just as the missionary needs a salary. And at that level, it's appropriate to give money. And the reason I share all of this in the context of volunteer groups is volunteers are coming to the field, and volunteers are coming with money in their pocket that they want to give away. If we don't train them in how money helps and how money hinders, they're going to give money led by their heart, but not necessarily led by an understanding of good strategy. So we want to make sure that we've explained this to them to help them be a part of the team and to see how they can minister most effectively in a way that will lead to reproducing healthy churches spreading throughout a people group. Hopefully that is going to give you some good insights into how to use money and how to use volunteers. If that's raised any questions you want to follow up with, please let me know. I'd be happy to talk to you about that. Hope you've been enjoying the study. We're going to look at some more strategies soon. And let me know if you have any questions. God bless. Well, hopefully all of that's been some good food for thought. You have picked up some tips. You realize there's more to going on a mission trip than just being a volunteerist and having a good time and getting a stamp in your passport. But you're thinking about ways you can make an impact for eternity through the kingdom. God bless, and we'll see you next time.